But there's only one way to stay wealthy, some combination of frugality and paranoia. And that's a topic we don't discuss enough. Let's begin with a quick story about two investors, neither of whom knew the other, but whose paths crossed in an interesting way almost a century ago. Jesse Livermore was the greatest stock market trader of his day. Born in 1877, he became a professional trader before most people knew you could do such a thing. By age 30, he was worth the inflation-adjusted equivalent of $100 million. By 1929, Jesse Livermore was already one of the most well-known investors in the world. The stock market crash that year, which ushered in the Great Depression, cemented his legacy in history. More than a third of the stock market's value was wiped out in an October 1929 week whose days were later named Black Monday, Black Tuesday, and Black Thursday. Livermore's wife, Dorothy, feared the worst when her husband returned home on October 29. Reports of Wall Street speculators committing suicide were spreading across New York. She and her children greeted Jesse at the door in tears, while her mother was so distraught she hid in another room, screaming. Jesse, according to biographer Tom Rubithon, stood confused for a few moments before realizing what was happening. He then broke the news to his family. In a stroke of genius and luck, he had been short the market, betting stocks would decline. "You mean we are not ruined?" Dorothy asked. "No, darling. I have just had my best ever trading day. We are fabulously rich and can do whatever we like," Jesse said. Dorothy ran to her mother and told her to be quiet. In one day, Jesse Livermore made the equivalent of more than $3 billion. During one of the worst months in the history of the stock market, he became one of the richest men in the world. As Livermore's family celebrated their unfathomable success, another man wandered the streets of New York in desperation. Abraham Germansky was a multi-millionaire real estate developer who made a fortune during the roaring 1920s. As the economy boomed, he did what virtually every other successful New Yorker did in the late 1920s. Bet heavily on the surging stock market. On October 26, 1929, the New York Times published an article that, in 2 paragraphs, portrayed a tragic ending. Bernard H. Sandler, attorney at 225 Broadway, was asked yesterday morning by Mrs. Abraham Germansky of Mount Vernon to help find her husband, who has been missing since Thursday morning. Germansky, who is 50 years old and an East Side real estate operator, was said by Sandler to have invested heavily in stocks. Sandler said he was told by Mrs. Germansky that a friend saw her husband late Thursday on Wall Street near the stock exchange. According to her informant, her husband was tearing a strip of ticker tape into bits and scattering it on the sidewalk as he walked towards Broadway. And that, as far as we know, was the end of Abraham Germansky. Here we have a contrast. The October 1929 crash made Jesse Livermore one of the richest men in the world. It ruined Abraham Germansky, perhaps taking his life. But fast forward 4 years, and the stories cross paths again. After his 1929 blowout, Livermore, overflowing with confidence, made larger and larger bets. He wound up far over his head in increasing amounts of debt and eventually lost everything in the stock market. Broke and ashamed, he disappeared for 2 days in 1933. His wife set out to find him. Jesse L. Livermore, the stock market operator of 1100 Park Avenue, is missing and has not been seen since 3 p.m. yesterday. The New York Times wrote in 1933 he returned, but his path was set. Livermore eventually took his own life. The timing was different, but Germansky and Livermore shared a character trait. They were both very good at getting wealthy and equally bad at staying wealthy. Even if "wealthy" is not a word you'd apply to yourself, the lessons from that observation apply to everyone, at all income levels. Getting money is one thing. Keeping it is another. If I had to summarize financial success in a single word, it would be survival.